Hi, my name is Carol Lee Roalkvam, and I'm the Environmental Policy Branch Manager here at WSDOT. Today I'm here with Nancy Boyd. I asked her to join me because for the last 3 years, in her role as the Deputy Design Engineer for WSDOT, she and I have been working together with other state agencies to look at the information that we now have on climate change and really work on what WSDOT can do with the information that the scientists have now given us to make our roads and our bridges and our ferry terminals and our rail more resilient to climate change. So Nancy, what I'd like you to introduce is the concept of asset management and how we've approached this as a team.
Sure, Carolee. Well, at WSDOT, we manage billions of dollars of state-owned infrastructure, and weather and extreme weather events affects all of our day-to-day business. We have maintenance folks out there on the front lines, and they're seeing things every day that affect our facilities and could have real financial impact on our system. So what we're doing is we've received a grant for $189,000 from the Federal Highway Administration to help us conduct a risk assessment of our state-owned facilities. And we're really, really glad and really fortunate that we were one of the very few in the nation to be able to receive this grant. And what it's allowed us to do is to conduct an inventory of everything that we own. And then what we're trying to do is we're taking a well-tested risk assessment process that we use on many of our cost estimates, and we're applying that to climate risk. And we're hoping that thanks to this grant, we're going to be able to show which of our facilities are at risk for climate change and perhaps take some proactive steps in managing our system.
Great. And you mentioned that it's part of our everyday business. Do you see this climate risk information gathering as new to WSDOT?
Well, the new part of it is that we have a better understanding of some of the changing climate effects on our system. And that's where the University of Washington has really helped us by providing a look into the future at some of the things that we might expect. So we can't just rely on our past experience. The past is not going to be an indicator of what we can expect in the future.
Okay, very good. What we're doing right now is working with all our maintenance offices and our GIS folks to look at existing experience. And then you'll hear later in this broadcast from the University of Washington scientists what they see happening in 2040 and 2080 in our state. So Nancy, do you have any comparable things like the way that we've looked at seismic risk or something like that? How do you view this?
Sure. That's a really good question, Carolee. Looking at risks to our infrastructure is not a new thing for WSDOT. As stewards of our state-owned infrastructure, we have a responsibility to care for all of these things and anticipate risks to our system so that we can plan for them and minimize our financial losses should some of these risks be realized. A good example is our seismic risk program. We have safety risk also that we look at, and other risks, environmental risks and so on. So climate risk, this is another dimension. It's new information that we now have from the scientists. But again, it's a similar sort of risk assessment that we make. It's really being responsible for our infrastructure.
Great. Well, thanks for helping me get this information out to the folks. We're going to be asking a lot of people as they look at the areas that they manage and the resources that they have stewardship over. So we're really looking forward to getting out across the state with this information, and thanks for helping me today.
Well, thank you for helping me.
All right. See you later.
Hi, I'm Mark Maurer. I'm the Highway Runoff Program Manager for WSDOT. With me today is Laura Whiteley-Binder, who works with the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington in Seattle. Laura, can you tell us a little about the Climate Impacts Group and the work you do?
Sure. The Climate Impacts Group is an interdisciplinary research team based at the University of Washington that studies the impacts of natural climate variability and human-induced climate change on the Pacific Northwest environment and its communities. We perform fundamental research on climate and climate impacts and work with decision makers to incorporate that information into decision-making processes. The goal of that research and our work with decision makers is to help the region become more resilient to the impacts of climate variability and climate change. Our work ranges in scale from individual watersheds to the entire western United States. Some work of particular relevance to Washington State right now is the 2009 Washington Climate Impacts Assessment, which we completed at the request of the Washington State Legislature. The Washington Assessment examined the impacts of climate change on 8 sectors in Washington, including hydrology and water resources, hydropower production, agriculture, forests, salmon, and human health. The information provided in the Washington Assessment and the data products associated with it continue to provide a resource to Washington's communities and agencies who are currently working on adaptation planning in the state.
There are a lot of questions about climate change, especially when people hear about global warming and then we have record snowfalls in places. Can you explain the difference between climate and weather?
This is a very good question. People tend to mix climate and weather and think of them as one and the same, when there are actually very important differences between the two. Weather refers to specific atmospheric conditions at a specific location at a specific point in time. The time periods that we typically describe weather in are minutes, hours, days, or weeks. So for example, right now the weather in Olympia is cloudy with a high of 44 degrees. Climate, on the other hand, is the average of weather patterns over longer periods of time, typically months, years, decades, or longer. So going to my previous example, while the anticipated high today in Olympia is 44 degrees, over 30 years of daily temperature records tell us that the average high for today in Olympia would be 56 degrees Fahrenheit. This difference between weather and climate is important. Climate is what you expect, but weather is what you get. Another way to remember is to think about vacation planning. You pick your vacation destination based on the climate, but you pack your bag based on the weather that you expect while you're visiting that destination. This difference between weather and climate is important with regards to how we will experience climate change in the coming decades. It would be a misconception to assume that every year will be warmer than the previous because of climate change. We will continue to see years of higher than average temperatures and colder than average temperatures, much in the way that the stock market continues to see years of above average performance and below average performance, even though the stock market on the long term has been a place of growth.
What kind of changes have we seen in the Pacific Northwest that could be related to climate change?
Pacific Northwest climate has been changing and changing in ways that are consistent with what we expect from climate change. Average annual temperature in the Pacific Northwest has increased 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit during the 20th century. Spring snowpack has declined in response to warmer spring and winter temperatures and changing precipitation patterns. For example, spring snowpack in the Washington Cascades has decreased about 28% for the period 1944 to 2000. Nearly every glacier in the Cascades and the Olympic Mountains is retreating, thinning, or in some cases doing both. The timing of peak stream flow is shifting earlier into the spring season as a result of warming temperatures and earlier snowmelt. In many places in Washington state, we're seeing an increase in extreme precipitation in the last 25 years, most notably in Puget Sound. And for many coastal areas in Washington, there has been an increase in sea level rise during the 20th century. For example, the city of Seattle has seen an increase in sea level of about 8 inches during the 20th century.
What projected changes in climate could affect our roads, bridges, and other facilities?
There are many impacts that could affect Washington's transportation infrastructure. Temperature is something that could have both direct and indirect impacts on the infrastructure. For the Washington Climate Change Impacts Assessment, we examined 39 different possible futures for Washington's climate, and all scenarios show increased warming through the 21st century. Warming is expected across all seasons, with the most significant warming occurring during the summer months. We anticipate more extreme heat events, particularly in eastern Washington. Precipitation is also projected to change, with an increase of about 1 to 2% in average annual precipitation. However, we are expecting more extreme precipitation, particularly in western Washington. Sea level rise, of course, is a major concern for coastal areas and for coastal infrastructure. Sea level rise is projected to increase globally due to melting of land-based ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica, and thermal expansion of ocean water in response to warming temperatures. Locally, there are other factors that will also affect how much sea level rise is likely to be observed in any given location. This includes things like plate tectonics and changes in wind patterns that can push waves onshore or offshore for extended periods of time. Increasing sea level rise will affect coastal processes such as erosion and will also lead to either permanent or more frequent periodic inundation of low-lying areas. Increasing sea level also affects storm surge and can lead to more significant damage from storm surge. For example, a 1-foot increase in sea level rise in the Puget Sound region can take what is currently a 100-year flood event and make it a 10-year flood event. A 2-foot increase in sea level rise can take what is currently a 100-year flood event and make it an annual event. Increased sedimentation is another problem associated with climate change as we lose glaciers and snowpack. Glaciers and snowpack currently armor soils, and as we lose glacial mass and as we lose snowpack, those unconsolidated soils will become exposed to weathering events such as heavy precipitation events. Once exposed, these soils are more likely to wind up in rivers and streams in Washington state. And this could lead to significant debris flows. For example, the Nisqually Riverbed is 38 feet higher today than in 1910 as a result of the receding glacier and the exposed materials that have been deposited in the riverbed since that time.
Is this a snapshot in time of anticipated changes, or is ongoing research changing those projections?
This is both a snapshot in time and, in many ways, a moving target. Climate is changing, and our communities are changing as well. So understanding how climate impacts may affect something like transportation infrastructure or other aspects of community requires continued refinement of what we can understand from the science, and also continued checking with how our communities are changing. So an important aspect of planning for climate change is recognizing that information will evolve over time as our understanding of the climate system improves, as our ability to model that system improves, and as our communities respond to both climate stresses and other stresses that shape a community's ability to adapt to climate change.
So now that you've seen some of the reasons that we're doing this project, we'd like to take you out in the field to talk to some WSDOT maintenance staff and other folks who are dealing with these problems today.
Well, I'm Larry Deemer. I work with the Department of Transportation out of Port Orchard Maintenance, and I've been out here on the canal most of my life. I was pointing out here of where the regular tidal action hits us, where you have this line of seaweed and stuff that's washed up on the beach, and extreme high tides will even get rock or water about halfway up on the rock. And then if we did get a fluctuation of another 3 feet added to that, we would probably see water clear over to the fog line of the highway in this location. And as it is now, you can see the Potlatch State Park down here in their restrooms. At a mean high tide, you'll see water clear up to the restrooms, floors and stuff. We're up here on 101 at Miller Creek, and with the culmination of the extreme high tides and the glacial till and runoff, we get a big deposit of gravels and silts here, and sometimes some log and debris jams on the other side of the bridge. And we end up with quite a bit of sediment underneath the bridge, and then with a extreme high tide and a lot of runoff, we end up flooding the neighbors out over here across the highway, and the water comes across the highway too to escape because of the backup with the sediment. Then during the summer we come in here when a stream dries up here, and we try and remove about 8 feet, 7 feet of material underneath the bridge and slope it out, and hopefully, like it is right now, this is the best I've seen it in about 3-4 years with the escape route for all the gravel and the bed load. We're out here on beautiful Hood Canal on a real nice sunny spring day, enjoying the weather. And I wanted to point out to you here on At Pebble Beach on 106, approximately milepost 10, we have a location where our elevation of the highway is low enough to where you can see the oyster shells and material is washed up about 6 inches to a foot below our highway, and at extreme high tides we do get water on the roadway. It's not enough to close the road, but we do get 3 or 4 inches of water out toward the center line of the highway. And if we get a rise of 2 foot or more, we would be closing this portion of the highway probably 1 to 2 times a day, depending on elevations of the tide. We are out here on Highway 300, about a mile west of Belfair and right alongside the Union River. And to my left here is where we have a lot of trouble with the tidal actions, and when we have a high tides, we usually end up closing the road or getting water on the road at least 4 times a year. And if you can see where the guardrail is right now, and if we have a fluctuation of 2 feet or more, this guardrail will be underwater during the high tides, and the road will probably be closed for 3-4 hours, maybe half a day, in order for all the water to drain out of this area.
I'm Mike Feely. I'm the Mottman lead tech in Thurston County here, and we're at the Mud Bay Bridge on SR 101, and we're here to look at the possibilities of a higher water level against the bridge. I've worked here for about 20 years, and I've seen probably a dozen times where the water's been up to that stake, and at a higher tide, it's all the way up to the high water marks that are on the bridge there. Another 3 feet would get up to the bridge deck and impact about 25,000 to 30,000 vehicles a day. This ditch that we're looking at has had fish in it before from Perry Creek. They'll work their way up almost all the way to the off-ramp. The catch basin that's in the median on the south side of the bridge, at high tides, the outfall from that is underwater, so that allows the water to back up into the median, and that median won't drain. It's in a low spot, and so there's never been any water up to the roadway as yet. Higher tides, longer lasting tides, and wind would definitely impact that also, though.
We're standing here on the White River, located at approximately milepost 38 on State Route 410. Historically, the White River used to follow the alignment of State Route 410, flow being parallel to the bank and going through a bridge crossing just downstream. Today, as you can see, the White River has changed course and is now directly impacting the toe of State Route 410. These additional forces cause the toe of the highway to erode by different failure mechanisms than previously possibly designed for. Rivers are very dynamic in nature. It is essential to have a complete understanding of all fluvial processes when designing to protect our infrastructure. Oftentimes, designers only look at a river in a snapshot in time. What's important is to understand that rivers are constantly changing with time. It's important to know what the river may have been doing historically and perhaps what it could potentially do in the future to ensure that the design that's in place to protect our infrastructure will last many years to come.
Hello, I'm Jim Park, I'm the Senior Hydrologist for the Washington State Department of Transportation. We're here on the White River along State Route 410 below Mount Rainier National Park. For some years, the department has had increased concerns about sedimentation in the White River and resulting lateral instability that's increasing maintenance problems for the highway and the traveling public. At the root of the problem we have here is this. We have a lot of fine sediment that's entering into the system. In addition to sediment coming in from logging and erosion of the river and the usual sources, the White River is plagued by an increasing volume of sediment entering the river off the high slopes of Mount Rainier. This is resulting from the melt-off of glaciers high on the mountain that leave many of the sediments on the mountain exposed to runoff and thus entry into the river. What happens when too much sediment comes into a river is that it fills up and loses its capacity. That forces the water to seek another path. Usually that path is lateral, either to one side or the other, resulting in erosion of the banks along the river. This has been happening along the White River at an increasing rate. It's raised the alarm of our maintenance division as well as our hydraulics and hydrology divisions. As an example of how quickly this is occurring, you can see off to my left here a large riprap revetment that was put in under an emergency flood fight back in 2003. It's now 2011. The river, in those few short years, has completely flip-flopped to the opposite side of the valley, to the point where it's flanked through the bridge that you can see behind me, which was formerly the main line for a timber company road. The aggradation between 2003 and when the bridge was actually flanked in 2009 is indicative of aggradation levels we've seen here that exceed 4 to 5 feet. Where I'm standing now, just a few years ago, was a channel 6 feet deep.
So as you can see, the impact to WSDOT's infrastructure due to climate change is real and is happening already. Today we're going to go through several different scenarios for climate change that may impact your area. What we would like for you to do as the subject matter experts is to tell us what impacts they may have on WSDOT's infrastructure.